I'm Jill. So in the past, in my 20s, I used them recreationally. Mushrooms, acid, I think peyote at one point. And that's all I remember. It was quite a while ago, but just recreationally, which now having had this experience is just nuts to me that I would use them recreationally and not more mindfully.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I remember the one time I did do mushrooms, I was in my brother's basement in Oak Park, Illinois, and we were just like hanging out, probably, playing Halo or whatever we were doing. And I remember it not being the greatest experience, but I think just because of what I said, like I wasn't using it mindfully, and especially for somebody who's so spiritually attuned, I think I felt like there was this whole portion of me that I wasn't going to, or I wasn't able to access just because of where I was at in my life. In retrospect, it's just where I was at in my process. But I remember at some point wanting it to be done and just being like, okay, I'm done. Can I be done with this? And I think that speaks to too, also the fact that I wasn't using it more mindfully. Like I could have been, now I'm like, oh my gosh, I could have been like extracting things that whole time from the experience. Maybe 2 weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks. It'll be 3 weeks this Friday. Yeah. So in retrospect, and the way that I have described this journey to other people is, the pain that I experienced was the most akin to childbirth of anything I've ever experienced. The waves of kind of beauty and pain that would switch up. But I realize now that much like with labor and childbirth, I was already in this tunnel before I even realized it. I was in this tunnel for maybe months before I got here. I knew something was coming. I knew there was something calcified in front of me that I couldn't break through. And I spent so much time in meditation and in spirit and in dream that it was something I couldn't solve myself. And I was really frustrated with it. Because usually if I go deep enough, I can kind of find the solution and rig it up. But I couldn't with this. And I was feeling, and I told you at the time before I did this, I felt much closer to death than I did to life. Because of that sensation, because of that feeling of like, I can't move this thing. I don't know how to move through this wall that's in front of me. And there's something in me that has the answer that I can't access. I knew that something had to shift and change. I knew it was something that I could not, with my normal tools, address. And it was becoming a bigger problem because it was bringing me closer to this sort of living death that I was really in. Immediately, I was with the spirit of somebody who was my past partner, and was my past partner for a very long time in many different iterations. And ultimately, I had ended up leaving the relationship in 2005, and finally in 2006 when I left Chicago, which is where we lived, and his spirit was immediately with me, which was so emotional. So emotional and overwhelming, and both of us in spirit without our flaws and foibles and human misgivings and inabilities, in just this incredibly pure form. And it was for hours, and his spirit just held me the entire time. And there were times when it was so potent, it was painful, and I'd have to like spin out and do something else and come back to it. But that's where I experienced the kind of waves that I was explaining of like birth, of just pain and grief and loss and creation and generation and generative nature and something being imparted and given and woven and very knitted. And, I saw in a very small snippet kind of the pain and emotional violence we had caused to each other, but it was very small. And it was, obviously imagistically, it was very scary to see, but there was also a part of me that really understood that like, this is just forming as an image to point to, as something to show what the potency of that was. And then, the really almost the remainder of the time was the other side of that, was just this pure, profound many life, many incarnation love and beauty and truth between us, that when I had left Chicago was ultimately, I had left all of those feelings because I could not have processed them at the time. There's no way that with the tools that I had, where I was emotionally in my journey and healing journey, it would have shattered me. I couldn't have made it through that. And so it has been, 16 years of not realizing that I was holding this and having that be what came through, and realizing that my mind had very purposely kind of focused on what was difficult and hard in that relationship, because I couldn't have dealt with the pain and the beauty of it and the other side of it. And so that was the majority of my journey. Was I saw, and it's funny because we had talked about kind of like how mushrooms, when they bruise and the blue comes to the surface of where that pain is. And I had seen towards the beginning of my journey, my body from above, and just this black spinning stone that was spinning above kind of each of my energy centers, pulling out all of this black dense energy like spaghetti and winding it up. And then I saw all these blue twinkling lights go into those spaces and all throughout my body. And so that kept happening throughout the journeys. I would see all of these blue kind of sparkling lights come into the bodies and come into the spirit and the energy that we share with each other, and do this healing work. But I remember kind of when I would switch them or kind of come to for a moment or step out of it for a moment, just these feelings of like, why are we like this? Like, why is this happening? Why is this my journey? Why is this my story? Like, why is this profound pain what came through, when what I wanted was this growth, right? Very, very naive take, because it unfolds, like you said. There's an integration that has to happen, and there's a process. And I remember getting done and not knowing how to get out of it, number one, like, because you just want to stay forever in this place if you have a great experience. And then having to come to and being like, well, now everything's harder than it was before. Now I have all the things going on in my life that were going before, and now I've just brought up this huge thing that was never processed and was never honored, more importantly, and was never integrated. And so now everything feels much weightier and harder. So foolishly, lot of kind of bravado and not recognizing maybe that I'm older than I was last time I did this. I got way back into life too quickly, because my child came back the next day. So even that night, I came back and I was every intention of just chilling out, because the medicine was still there. And all of my friends were like, what happened? What happened? So I'm kind of, filling them in and trying to monitor myself. But the next day my child came home and was like, let's go to my school for this fall fair. And I'm like, okay. So I had to kind of shatter back into life way too quickly, which is something I would do totally differently next time, because it is such a nascent state. It is such a fragile and tender state to be in. And there is very much that moment of like, the lights are too bright, everything's way too loud, colors are too bright, this reality is not natural, it's way too much. Just that overwhelm of the two different places and trying to have to navigate while really living in both. So it was really challenging, and I have a lot of regrets over that, but I kind of fought for the pockets of time that I could have to kind of put myself back together, and would spend more time before sleep just feeling and piecing and being in spirit. So I will say I hit a real low and I reached out to you because I was like, is this normal? I hit kind of a scary low, and I think it was one in part because I did integrate way too fast back into reality. And then two, like I said, I had that moment of like, well, now everything's harder. Now my life is harder than it was. Like, I didn't get what I wanted out of this. And I felt just tremendous, like, still attachment to death and attachment to the other side, kind of like when you get to do childbirth, right? Because you have to go so close to the other side to usher in the soul. And it didn't feel very dissimilar to that. It was really hard. A lot of very dark ideation and a lot of pain for, I'd say, probably 2 days after. And then I spoke to you, and I just was able to kind of fight for those pockets for myself and start putting myself back together. And thankfully that week, some smart past part of me had scheduled like private dry sauna and a float tank. And so I did a lot of integration there and kind of the putting myself back together that needed to happen in a really gentle way. But as far as like the things that happened in the days after, like it's a journey, you know, that I'm still on. Like it's still integrating right now. It's still happening on the day-to-day. I'm still making the connections. And I think once I started making those connections, I was like, oh, okay, this isn't a one and done thing. Like this is going to happen very actively for the next however long. And there's going to be new realizations constantly. And so some of the things I realized were about what I had to do to survive. That rupture which was of such magnitude that I couldn't tolerate it at the time. One of the things I had done is when I left Chicago, I did not stop moving my body or my life until now, until this last year, and just this frenetic amount of very mental activity. You know, I entirely moved out of my heart center and into my head. I made logic-based decisions. I shut down all of those things so I wouldn't have to feel anything. And I realized that while that allowed me to survive, it actually ended up, you know, just generating different kinds of problems. When you're not integrated, you know, when those two centers aren't together, you end up making a different set of decisions that get you to a different difficult place versus having the courage, which I don't want that to sound like a judgment, because it's not, because it's hard and there are things that will take a deep toll. I know I couldn't have dealt with those things earlier in my life. There's no way. And I know it took me this long to do it, but there's a certain amount of grief that I couldn't do it then. There's a certain amount of like, for as far as you think you are in your healing journey, you never are. And there's just always more layers. There's just always more layers to it. So I had this real grief of having kind of divorced myself from these parts of me that I definitely feel growing back now, right? Like there's even a way that I really stilted and stunted myself from listening to music for 16 years. Like it became very peripheral and like something like a delicacy almost, because it was just too painful. And like music, like an entire part of living that's joyful and good and wonderful I had to kind of leave and pull myself out of. And so I realized that in that movement away to try and survive in the days after the journey, like what the cost of that really was. So part of the reason that this relationship was really hard for me is I entered into it when I was young. Still, I was 19. And so, I was really coming out of the family home, which was profound trauma, just profound layers of trauma and dysfunction and abuse. And so one thing that I realized is because I had been interfered with by family members at a very, very young age, like a profoundly young age, things like desire and attraction became really, really complicated things at obviously way too young of an age. And so when I actually met somebody that I desired and was attracted to, I could not separate those feelings out. And so I felt threatened and afraid. At the same time, I was compelled and interested. And so I think part of what the journey showed me is without that complication, without those associations, without all of the narratives that were given to me by my family and other people, ripping off those layers, or it was more gentle than that, but peeling back those layers and showing me the lack of fear and the lack of trepidation and uncertainty and panic that I was never able to access while I was in that relationship. And so this much purer form of just two spirits enjoying and appreciating each other in this loving way that, I don't think I've experienced anywhere else in life, certainly in that way, right? We have children and that's its own form, but not in this way of pure energies meeting and honoring and saluting each other. The place I think I'm at with the journey right now is what comes, the beauty of anything like this and of healing work that you have to fight so hard for to find is that what ends up rising is always going to be the love and the light and the goodness. And so where I'm at with it right now is just this profound gratitude for not only this other person who I've lived lives with, but the fact that we've seen each other, just at our worst and at our best and at our most pure, and that I am so fortunate in this life to get to have had that. Most people don't ever get to meet somebody like that. And to have them, even though we were flawed and imperfect and all those things, to have them bear witness and to get to bear witness to them is just such an honor. So I just feel this profound gratitude that's really opened up the heart center and the ability to integrate and to say things and move out of such a cerebral place of guessing and second guessing myself and just start living from a place of feeling again, which I haven't done in so long. So really for my lifetime, I've been uncomfortable with my name. Like that's been a thing. I was named something else when I was born and my mom changed it because everybody misspoke it. And so I've been really uncomfortable with my name my whole life. And it's been a life of incredible difficulty, just one after another, and strife and rising up and just, getting tired of rising up. And so I realized in this journey that one of the integrations was that this really was a death and a birth, and that's why this person was here, was to bring me from one side to the other and usher me. And that's why the pain was so painful and so profound and deep, and that's why the beauty was so overwhelming, and why I was finding myself likening it to childbirth. That's the only pain I can liken it to. And so when I saw my friends, when we went out, my friend looked at me, who I've known for so long, and she goes, "Your name isn't Jill anymore, is it?" And I was like, "No, it's not." She's like, "I can tell." I said, "It hasn't been for quite a while. Like, Jill's really done. She's been done for quite a while. And there just hasn't been that point of transition. And so I most likely will change my name." And I don't know that, that iteration, that Jill is necessarily done with her work in this life, but she's done with that work in this life. And there's very much a point of demarcation from before and after this journey that was on the horizon for many years. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that psychedelics before and the way I was using them before, no. But this experience, I would honestly never do it another way again. I would never just do it at home, for so many reasons. But I think the safety, I think something that's extremely beautiful about the experience that you offer is it's almost like you're sick or getting over an illness, because there's just this soft, every now and then soft noise in the house, like that reassurance of somebody is also here. There's somebody protecting, there's somebody watching the space. That is very, very important to me and my journey. And that just kind of feeling of triage, in a way, of being tended in triage, is really important. For the amount of meditation and work that I do in spirit, I never would have arrived at this. I know that I never would have. And even if I arrived at it, I would never extract or distill out of it the potency of what I was able to get from this journey. And therefore, the resonance and the ripple effect and the long-term, still making these connections of oh, that's why I did that thing, or oh, that's how that was functioning in my life. That's how that thing was keeping me safe. And that's how I need to grow. That's what I need to grow into or move into, to dismantle that thing so that I'm not preventing myself anymore. Absolutely changed my life, where I'm at, where I'm going, what I want. And I would absolutely do it again.